A significant escalation in the Canada-U.S. trade relationship today. President Donald Trump has imposed 50% tariffs on a wide range of Canadian goods. It's all in response to what a senior White House official described as Canada's retaliation against U.S. trade policy and Canadian discrimination against U.S. motor vehicles, dairy, and alcohol. Let's bring in someone who has a lot of experience with these U.S. trade talks. Brian Clow is a former Deputy Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Nice to see you, Brian. Thanks for coming on a busy day.
Good to be here. Very busy.
Yeah, Brian. So what do you make of these tariffs that we're now facing potentially in 30 days? They say they're going to ramp it up to 50% and slap it on a long list of Canadian products.
Well, for sure, this is a big deal. If you're in a sector that's being threatened today, you are much more nervous today than you were. And if you're in a sector that has been threatened by the United States, where they've been coming after you for concessions the last few months, you're also more nervous today because this may force Canada back to the table. But I can tell you it's not a surprise to the people in government and people who've been watching this closely, because they've known for a while that the U.S. may turn up the heat on us.
Yeah, why do you think they were anticipating that? Because these things get uglier before they get any better? Is that sort of the way these things go? They just like to torture us a little bit before they come to some sort of agreement?
I think that's exactly right. The talks had kind of stalled. They'd quieted down since July 1st. So someone had to make a move here. Clearly, the U.S. has done that. Good news is Canada has some time to think about its next steps. They have 30 days. So they should take that time, react calmly, not rush into any quick judgments or decisions here, and think about their next steps.
What do you make of the products they're deciding to tariff the Americans? They're talking about wine, a long list of alcohol that will be hit with tariffs, hockey sticks, cement, some question, like it's a weird list, frankly, but I'm sure it's all done intentionally, trying to put the most pain on some of the sectors that are hurting the most. What do you make of the list of items that they've decided to ramp up the tariffs on?
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. When a country designs a list like this, they go after where they can inflict a maximum pain, but also suffer the least amount of damage on their own economy. It is notable that the list they put out today includes a ton of exemptions. Potash still exempt, energy still exempt. So they could only go so far here, and they targeted what they consider to be some vulnerable sectors. It's definitely going to be painful, though, for those sectors, and the government needs to take that very seriously as it thinks about its next steps.
Obviously, there's some time, as you say, to think about those next steps, 30 days before these take effect, if they ever take effect. What would you be counseling Prime Minister Mark Carney to do about this now? Should he be counseling the premiers to put the alcohol back on the shelves, to get that American booze in front of consumers again? Would you counsel him to roll back some of those retaliatory tariffs that are still in place on some American products? Should we capitulate in a way to try and get Trump to drop these tariffs and get to a CUSMA deal? Or do we take a tougher stand and ramp up our tariffs per se? What is the best way forward?
You laid out all the options, and this is the very tough situation in front of the government right now. And we've actually seen different maneuvers in all those categories you just mentioned. They've been employed by the government at different points. But what we see on the U.S. side is an American president and an administration that just wants to keep hammering us. And this might be something the government has to come to terms with, and all Canadians may have to come to terms with. It's possible at the end of this, there just is no deal. The president has been clear. He does not think cars should be made in Canada. He does not think the U.S. should be importing steel, aluminum, other products. And every time they make a move, they just turn up the heat on us. So I'm not so sure that the retaliation that we employed successfully in the first Trump term, not so sure that's going to work as well this time. I'm also not sure that easing off on current measures is going to move the dial much, because I just think we have a U.S. president on the other side that maybe doesn't want to do a deal. All that said, what the government should be doing now, and I'm sure they are, is taking a step back, taking a breath, and thinking through the next interaction that they will have with Jameson Greer, Howard Lutnick, and others in the administration.
You mentioned the things that they are not tariffing. I mean, there's a fairly lengthy list of things that are now facing a 50% tariff. But you mentioned, energy, potash. There's also certain other goods. They're saying fish or critical minerals. So that tells you a bit of where their weak spots are, I guess, right? I mean, those are potential areas that we could press on if we needed to, right? Because they do need our potash or American agriculture collapses, right? We know they take in about 4 million barrels of Canadian oil each and every day. I don't know necessarily why they're dependent on fish. I know maybe that's for restaurants and what have you, and their fish producers can't come up with as much as what they need. Critical minerals, obviously there's this scramble around the world to get their for countries to get their hands on critical minerals, to check China's authority on this because they're so dominant in that space. Do you think that there's something we can do with that list? Like, is there something we can work with there to try and get them to come around by bringing up energy, by bringing up potash, by going all in on critical minerals? Is there something to be said for maybe tapping into their weaknesses and using it to our advantage?
Well, you're exactly right. These are things they need. It's why they've been exempted, and they are still exempted today, even after this very dramatic escalation. Look, Canada does have leverage. Those products you mentioned, our military orders, where those go, that is a big decision and a big point of leverage that Canada has. Our trade relations with other countries, that's a point of leverage. The Americans really don't like that we're talking to China again in a more constructive way. Well, one thing that for sure will come out of today is it will push those voices in the Canadian government who say we got to get closer to China. It'll push them more in that direction. These are actually points of leverage in our talks with the Americans, and these will all be considered by the government in the next few days.
We've been talking about this deteriorating relationship now for a while. Obviously, we're in July 2026. This really came on our radar at the end of 2024, right? The relationship seems to be, as I was saying a little earlier, not necessarily in tatters, but it's not in a good place, and it's not really headed in a better direction at this point. Do you think that this only does more damage? I mean, maybe the answer is obvious, but what kind of damage does this do to the bilateral relationship when they keep hammering us? You know, they're clearly not gunning for a resolution here. They just want to ramp up the pressure on us. Are you worried about the state of the bilateral relationship as this progresses, as things seemingly get worse before they get any better?
Short answer is yes. I think we all have been, and all Canadians have been since Trump returned in late 2024. It was a surprise to a lot of people. We knew Trump returning was going to be very difficult, but the forcefulness and the aggressiveness with which he has gone after Canada right out of the gate is a surprise to a lot of people, and it is negatively impacting the relationship. As long as the president and his team keep hammering us, it's going to negatively affect this relationship, and it's going to, I don't know that I'd say in tatters, as you said. There's still a lot of good that brings our two countries together, a lot of trade that goes both ways, but we've clearly got a long way to go to get it back on a better track.
Just let's end on this note. Politically speaking, obviously the Prime Minister was elected kind of promising to take on the Americans and get to some sort of deal and put them in their place effectively. He hasn't had a ton of success to this point in terms of actually getting them to roll over on some of the threats, although we know there's progress on the Gordie Howe Bridge that's still expected to open. At least there'll be a ceremony on Friday, officially open to traffic on Monday. Politically speaking for him, when does he have to deliver some wins, do you think? I mean, at this point, it seems like he's made a lot of concessions on the digital services tax, on counter tariffs. He's made some concessions on the net toll revenues that will be shared with the Americans out of that Gordie Howe Bridge. Do you think at some point he needs to have some concrete results to show voters, or are voters with him because they know that he's just dealing with a very erratic president?
I think it's largely the latter. I think the people who voted for Mark Carney trust him amongst the candidates available to them. They trust him to be able to handle this relationship far better than anyone else. And I think he's doing that. We are facing a U.S. president that just wants to hammer us and cause us to make concessions. And I think Mark Carney's the best person to make the judgment of where there is some give, where we might be able to do some deals with the Americans, but where we also have to stand up for ourselves. And that's why I think his support levels are remaining as high as they are. I think that'll continue.
Well, let's leave it there. So nice to see you, Brian. Brian Clow served as the Deputy Chief of Staff to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Appreciate you hopping on. Thank you.
Good to be here.
Flavio Volpe, the president of the Canadian Vehicles Manufacturers Association. Flavio, we don't have a ton of details here, but we know they're going to hit more Canadian products with a 50% tariff in retaliation for keeping Canadian alcohol off the shelves in retaliation for some things related to motor vehicles. I'm not entirely sure why they say we're discriminating against American exports, but that's one reason they're citing. And of course, dairy, going back to the supply managed system, saying that because that's in place, they need to hit us with new tariffs. What have you heard so far, and are you concerned?
Well, look, I'm always concerned when our chief trading partner decides that they're upset enough to use a section of law, the Trade Act of 1930, a Section 338 that they've never used before. It's untested. It's never been used, but it allows the president to impose up to 50% tariffs 30 days after his proclamation on specific countries. This is different than their IEPA tariffs where they declare an economic emergency and he puts something on everybody. It allows that the president to target, and I'm just looking at my notes here, a specific country for a specific discrimination. And it looks like what they've done is they've organized this around, look, Canada imposed counter tariffs on cars when the president did last year, 25% for 25%. They are looking at the proclamation that they put out there on the booze is, talks about the LCBO and in Canada, in the provinces, in some provinces, they control access to shelves for alcohol, and they've discriminated only against U.S. alcohol. And then it appears here that we've got a bunch of other stuff, including cement, and the first thing that occurs to me is tomorrow the Americans are meeting with the Mexicans for another round of conversations in Mexico City. We've seen the president try to turn up the heat in key moments. We also heard him over the last couple of days wanting to blame the wildfire smoke that's drifted south on some lack of action from Canada. But, of course, we've been very, very active, and we have a boreal forest that is about half the size of the United States, and fires are burning in the States as well. So we're going to have to read through this list. We see things, it doesn't appear to be a retaliation on cars. So they're using the discrimination that they say Canada's using in the retaliatory tariffs on cars to go and impose an 18-page list of tariffs on things like tulip bulbs and natural honeys and down feathers and vegetable saps. And I'm just skimming through this list. Vinyl tile floor coverings. There's a list here for antiques that are older than 100 years, but less than 250 years. So on first pass, I see this as, the types of negotiating tactics we've seen from them. Yeah. What's important here from the sector that I represent, the auto parts suppliers, which are Canadian companies that have a tariff exemption in this right now. It appears they're using that as justification, the counter tariffs, but they're not reimposing new tariffs in that sector.
Flavio, can I jump in for a second? Because I want to read you something that the senior administration official told us when they were relaying to us why they're putting these tariffs in place. And he says, or they say, this official, that Canada imposes certain tariffs and quotas on cars imported to Canada from the United States and not on imports from other countries. Canada also administers these quotas in a way that compels U.S. auto companies to invest in production in Canada instead of the United States. Do you know what he's referring to there? What are these tariffs and quotas that we've imposed on U.S. vehicles coming into this country? That seems to be the justification for it. I didn't realize we had that sort of regime in place. Maybe you can speak to that.
Yeah, you didn't realize that because of the way that he put it. But for the lay people, and you and I have talked about this in the past, they put a 25% tariff on cars from Canada. Sure. We put a 25% tariff on cars from the U.S. We don't have that tariff on other places because other places didn't put tariffs on our cars.
Right.
And they put that tariff on our cars to damage, as the president said was his objective, to end the car making business in Canada. And his Commerce Secretary repeating that throughout the last year and a half. So that's why we don't have that on other countries. We're not in a trade war with Japan. And then also, what they're talking about is kind of favorable conditions to see if we'll make sure those companies invest in Canada. Well, what we said to the 5 automakers that are making cars here that are invested in Canada and that are still employing Canadians in spite of the fact of these tariffs to say, look, we're not going to punish your businesses. Toyota, for example, you make 500,000 cars here. We're not going to punish you for the imports you have for vehicles that you make in Kentucky. But what we'll do is we'll match it. If you make a car here, you get a credit for an import there where we'll remit the tariff. Now, that senior official from the U.S. Said that in a much more formal sense, but he didn't tell you that there wasn't this tariff until they put a tariff in place.
Of course.
And that we're just trying to protect current investment. It would be great if what he said was true, which is going to get new investment. But I haven't seen any new investment here except for what Unifor negotiated with Ford yesterday.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you brought that up because it doesn't seem all dire on that front. I mean, there's $1 billion potentially going into that sector, a new commitment from Ford, right, as they broker this new agreement with the union that represents the auto workers. Flavio, what do you think we should do about this? I mean, it's early days. We're literally just sorting through the list. We don't have the extent of the damage just yet. We don't know just how far-reaching these tariffs are, literally sorting through the documents on air as you're speaking. But what do you think we should do in response? Should we match them tariff for tariff as we have in the past, and especially in the Trudeau era when we went toe-to-toe with them on counter tariffs? Do you think we should sit back and try to negotiate these away before they come into effect in 30 days? What is really the best path forward from your perspective?
30 days is a long time. I think we should read it. I read it in 8 minutes before you pulled me on. Yeah. But then things like riding toys, separate from bicycles. We should see if we make riding toys and if anybody's affected. Talk on hockey sticks. I got a scar on my forehead from a hockey stick. That hockey stick was made in China, even though it had a Canadian trademark on it. So we should see if we actually make hockey sticks before we retaliate on hockey sticks. I think there's a plant in Brantford that makes $5 million worth of hockey sticks a year. So part of this, the most important piece is, here's the U.S. willing to use another section of their trade acts that allows them to target a specific country. They have to make a case that we are excluding or being discriminatory against them, and then you can put up the 50% tariffs. In all those cases that they've highlighted now, of Canadian discrimination, those were Canadian responses to American discrimination that was unsolicited, right, that came out of nowhere, and that causes Americans to pay more for things that come from Canada. So I don't want to moralize on who's right and wrong here, but I also think that if part of the reaction to this is the Canadians saying, what did we do wrong? Canadian government saying, what did we do wrong? Well, this just really comes back to a year delay of, hey, we didn't like that you stood up to us. Now we're going through the last few months of very productive conversations with the administration, especially USTR. There was a really big list of irritants that was outstanding. That list, there's some reports that list is down to the number of fingers that are on my hands. Maybe they're adding to that list as we get further down. Okay, but I'm not panicking about honey. I am obviously going to read through this thing and be a little bit concerned for people who are in the wine and alcohol business in Canada. But it's not I think we did the right thing by retaliating. This is what gets them to respond. This is how that government works. The president and the prime minister were together yesterday, by all accounts. That was a respectful conversation, and we know they talk to each other on a frequent basis. I think we are watching the art of the deal. We're watching Donald Trump do things the way that Donald Trump does things, and they're testing Section 338 to be able to use it in other places. But really importantly here, on pieces of industrial Canada that have been carrying the burden of the trade war, have been paying the price for this trade war for a year: automobile assembly, steel, aluminum, lumber. It doesn't appear that there is an acceleration and a lighting of fires in those spaces. This is them saying, we don't like the booze that are not on the shelves. And by the way, we don't like it when we have to repeat 2, 3, 4 times that only you and China responded. We just have to decide how we want to be as a country and how we want to be as negotiators here. I, for one, our industry was very happy that the Canadian government responded and put into place these counter tariffs, and then put into place these remissions programs for the companies that are invested here, because keeping people buying parts and keeping people employed.
Yeah.
And I expect we're going to see a lot more of this as we get closer to trade peace. Here we are, 5 o'clock on a Monday in July, doing what we do with the Trump administration.
I'll just say, Flavio, I'm reading a tweet here from Steve Ratner. You might know him. He was part of the Obama Auto Task Force. He was very much involved in, after the Great Recession of 08-09, trying to save the industry as it was going down. And he's just trying to counter Trump's claim that this is the golden age of American manufacturing. He has some of the data here showing that despite these tariffs, despite the administration, Jameson Greer, the USTR, saying that this is bringing jobs back to America, they've actually lost 75,000 manufacturing jobs since Trump's re-election. Meanwhile, over the same time period, Biden created tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. He puts it at 625,000. So it just goes to show you, Flavio, that some of these tariffs are not necessarily panning out in terms of creating jobs. We know the sector that you work with, Ford, GM, Chrysler, Stellantis, they're panicked about USMCA, CUSMA, and where it stands. They've been raising the alarm bells about just how much it's costing them to pay these tariffs, right? I mean, it's not clear if this is actually producing meaningful results to improve American jobs and improve the manufacturing picture in the United States. In fact, some of the info we have at our fingertips suggests it's actually making it a lot worse, and that the American companies this is supposed to help are being pinched badly by these funds, right? They've paid tens of billions already, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
Haven't looked at the figures to this point. It does raise important questions as to why they're choosing to go down this route when all the evidence before us suggests it's not working out so well for them.
Well, look, the Center for Automotive Research in Michigan, okay, this is an American research group funded by Americans, put out a report earlier this year that said that the Trump tariffs in the automotive sector are costing American-based manufacturing, whether that's vehicles, parts, or raw materials, $188 billion over 3 years. That's $188 billion of new costs without a return on investment, without new product or new innovation or new jobs, while the Chinese have arrived at the coasts to take every customer they can in a price war. So it's not smart.
Yeah.
I'm still bullish about a deal in the coming months. I know who we're dealing with. We went through similar things in 2018 and 2019. It turned the heat up at the end, create a little bit of drama. Would they like to see Premier Ford put American booze on the shelves in the other two provinces and get that concession without having to negotiate anything for it? Sure. Would you like to try for it? Well, we know the Trump administration tries for anything it can. So I'm not surprised. I am disappointed. But when I look at this 18-page list of things that are on it, I don't know how much business we have in things like antiques and
essential oils of grapefruit. I didn't know, like I was saying, essential oils of grapefruit. I didn't even know that was a thing we made here.
Well, sandblasting machines are on this. So if you're in the sandblasting machine business, this is important. But we don't have a cluster of sandblasting. Yeah. And so we'll read through this and we'll respond properly, but we shouldn't panic.
Okay, let's leave it there. Thank you so much, Flavio. Really appreciate you jumping on the line with so little notice to break it all down for us. It's always so great to have your perspective on this. No one better dialed in than you. Flavio Volpe with the Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association. He's the president there. Thank you, Flavio. Appreciate it.
Thank you.